Gopichana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vrajrajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parvajakacharya Astarasata Sri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavendra Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sigo Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Sri Sri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai Dwarka Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Yamuna Mai Ki Jai Srimati Tulasi Devi Ki Jai Gaur Premananda. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 5, The Cause of All Causes. Text, I was told 25. Is that correct? What does that go? Tāmasād. Start with tāmasād. Okay. Tāmasād. Api. Bhūtāder. Vikurvāṇād. Abhūn. Nabhaḥ, tasya, marā, guṇaḥ, śabdo, liṅgaṁ, draṣṭṛ-dṛśyayoḥ, tāmasād api bhūtāder, vikurvāṇād abhūn nabhaḥ. Tasya mātrā guṇaḥ śabdo liṅgam draṣṭṛ-dṛśyayoḥ tāmasād api bhūtāder vikurvāṇād abhūn nabhaḥ tasya mātrā guṇaḥ śabdo liṅgam draṣṭṛ-dṛśyayoḥ tāmasād api bhūtāder vikurvāṇād abhūn nabhaḥ tasya mātrā guṇaḥ śabdo liṅgam draṣṭṛ-dṛśyayoḥ tāmasād api bhūtāder. Bhūtāder. Nabhaḥ. śabdo. tāmasāt bhūtāder. So, Vaishnavis? Anyone? Okay. tāmasāt bhūtāder. abhūn nabhaḥ. Martrā guṇaḥ śabdo. liṅgaṁ draṣṭṛ-dṛśyayoḥ. Tāmasād, from the darkness of false ego. Api, certainly. Bhūta-ādeḥ, of the material elements. Vikurvāṇād, because of transformation. Abhūt, generated. Nabhaḥ, the sky. Tasya, its. Mātrā, subtle form. Guṇaḥ, quality. śabdaḥ, sound. liṅgaṁ, characteristics. Yet, as its. draṣṭṛ, the seer. dṛśyayoḥ, of what is seen. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Translation. From the darkness of false ego, the first of the 5 elements, namely the sky, is generated. Its subtle form is the quality of sound, exactly as the seer is in relationship to the seen. Purport. The 5 elements, namely sky, air, fire, water, and earth, are all but different qualities of the darkness of false ego. This means that the false ego is the sum total form of This means that the false ego in the sum total form of mahat-tattva is generated from the marginal potency of the Lord. And due to this false ego of lording it over the material creation, ingredients are generated for the false enjoyment of the living being. The living being is practically the dominating factor over the material elements as the enjoyer, though the background is the Supreme Lord. Factually, save and accept the Lord, no one can be called the enjoyer. But the living entity falsely desires to become the enjoyer. This is the origin of false ego. When the bewildered living being desires this, the shadow elements are generated by the will of the Lord, and the living entities are allowed to run after them as after a phantasmagoria. It is said that first the tanmatra sound is created, and then the sky. And in this verse, it is confirmed that actually it is so. But sound is the subtle form of sky, and the distinction is like that between the seer and the seen. The sound is the representation of the actual object, as the sound produced, speaking of the object, gives an idea of the description of the object. Therefore, sound is the subtle characteristic of the object. Similarly, sound representation of the Lord in terms of his characteristics is the complete form of the Lord. As seen by Vasudeva and Maharaj Dasarath, the fathers of Lord Krishna and Lord Ram. The sound representation of the Lord is non-different from the Lord himself, because the Lord and his representation in sound are absolute knowledge. Lord Chaitanya has instructed us that in the holy name of the Lord, as sound representation of the Lord, all the potencies of the Lord are invested. Thus, one can immediately enjoy the association of the Lord by the pure vibration of the sound representation of his holy name, and the concept of the Lord is immediately manifested before the pure devotee. A pure devotee, therefore, is not aloof from the Lord, even from a second. The holy name of the Lord, as recommended in the Shastras, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Hare. May therefore be constantly chanted by the devotee, aspiring to be constantly in touch with the Supreme Lord. One who is thus able to associate with the Lord is sure to be delivered from the darkness of the material world, which is a product of false ego, tamasī mā jyotirgama. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gadanjana Shalakaya Chakshur-militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we've learned in this chapter that from the false ego or hankara in the mode of ignorance, the tamaguna, all the elements of the material universe are generated. From the mode of passion, the senses of the living entities, the conditioned souls, are developed. And from the mode of goodness, the controllers of all these different elements, the demigods, and ultimately there's Krishna behind them, but for the control of the elements in the material universe, the demigods are generated. It's astonishing in what sense in one sense, what Srila Prabhupada is saying here in his purport, his explanation of this verse. He's saying, from the marginal potency of the Lord, from the Jiva Shakti, which we are a part of, the false ego is generated, and then from the false ego, by a gradual process, all the other elements are generated. So, in one sense, if we want to ask, who made this universe that we're caught up in, the answer is you. Because without there being some jiva souls, some members, some part of that marginal potency of the Lord that desire to enjoy separately from the Lord, then there wouldn't be any need for a material universe. And not just one. We learn from the Srimad Bhagavatam that Mahavishnu is generating millions and millions, uncounted numbers of material universes. So, actually, elsewhere in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada explains that there are 3 causes of the universe. One of them being Daiva, which he defines in this context as meaning the destiny of the conditioned souls. That means their destiny, because of their desire to enjoy separately from Krishna, is that they must come to this place and take on material bodies to enjoy themselves. And then there is the element of Krishna's will. Nothing happens without Krishna's will. Ishvara Parama Krishna. He's the supreme controller. Tāmasād. There is no one who can tell him what to do. All the living entities are subordinate to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Jivaras Rupahoy Krishnara Nityadas. The constitutional position of the soul is to be servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Ekala Ishvara Krishna Arasabhabritya. There's one controller, Krishna, and everyone else, including his plenary expansions, his fully empowered expansions, are his servants. They see themselves as his servants. So, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam Eko Bahunam Yo Vididati Kaman. There are, throughout the whole cosmos, there are many beings who are conscious and they are eternal. Krishna is eternal, so the jiva soul is also eternal. Mamaivam so jiva loke jiva bhūta sanatana. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, all the souls, they are part of me. Mamaivam so jiva loke jiva bhūta sanatana. Manasastan indriyani prakritishtani karshati. So, yes, we are part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but at the present moment we find ourselves prakritishta, covered by the material energy, struggling with the mind and the senses. So, why is that? It's because we're not all powerful. Although the jiva souls, many of them in the material world, think that they are the supreme controllers. That's the reason why they're under the influence of false ego. They learn, or they should learn, the material creation is designed in such a way that they should learn what their real position is, that they aren't the supreme controllers, that everything they try to accomplish is ultimately going to be a failure. Mogasha, moga karmana, moga jnana vichestadaha. Whatever they're trying to accomplish is ultimately going to fail unless they develop a desire to come to their natural position. So when this happened, that they decided not to be in their proper position, is something that's called in the Srimad Bhagavatam durvitarkyena. We'll never figure it out by logic. No one can figure that out. What we can understand is that somehow or other, by free will, we've exercised our free will in such a way that at the present moment, we're not fit to exist in the spiritual world, where everything is Sat Chit Ananda, full of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. That's our natural position. And we experience that. We experience some discomfort in the material world, which is asukham and anityam. It's not full of pleasure. It's full of different kinds of miseries, some of which I've been experiencing. But it's also temporary. So, how to get to that original position which is our natural position? And that is by sound vibration. But Srila Prabhupada makes a very important point in this verse, that the material creation begins with sound, with śabda. That is the first element that's created. So from sound, everything comes, even in the material sense. Many times Srila Prabhupada would talk, okay, somebody wants to build a building, so they talk to an architect, they exchange words. By sound, the building comes up. So in the material world, it's also like that. Everything is generated first from sound. And according to the Vedanta Sutra, the way that we become freed from our contact with matter is again sound vibration, anavriti śabdat. I think that's actually the last verse of the Vedanta Sutra, that one can become liberated from the material entanglement by sound vibration. But not by material sound vibration, but by spiritual sound vibration. Golokara Premadana Harinama Sankirtana. The transcendental sound coming from the spiritual level of reality and received through disciplic succession has the power to liberate us, because as Srila Prabhupada mentioned in this purport, Lord Chaitanya says, Nam Namakare Bahuda Nija Sarva Shaktish, that all the potencies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are invested in the transcendental sound of His holy names, the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra in particular, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So, the material world is set up for two purposes. The first is to give the conditioned souls the opportunity to become more and more deeply entangled in the material energy, if that's what they choose to do. But simultaneously, Krishna is also giving the opportunity for those same conditioned souls to make progress towards returning or going to, depending upon how you see things, attaining their natural position, which they're not in at the present moment. So there's so many arrangements that Krishna makes for this purpose. He comes himself to try to remind us. He is existing in our hearts as the super soul, just waiting for us to turn to him. The Upanishads give the example of the soul and the super soul being like two birds and a tree. And one of the birds is eating the fruits of the tree of material existence, material happiness and material distress. And the super soul, the eternal friend of the individual soul, is just waiting for that soul to turn. And when finally, after perhaps many millions of births in the material world, that soul turns to the super soul, then the super soul can arrange for them to fly to the spiritual world. So, when Krishna, as super soul, the Chaitya Guru, the Guru within the heart, sees that a conditioned soul has developed some tiny desire to come to its natural position, to wake up from the phantasmagoria of material existence, that same super soul, that Chaitya Guru, the Guru within the heart, manifests before that conditioned soul as the spiritual masters, the bona fide spiritual master, the Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru. And through them and through the Vedic literature and taking up the process of devotional service, the soul can come to its natural condition of life. So, I have some more points I wanted to make. So another factor in the production of the material universe is the time factor. Krishna says, Kalosmi lokachaya krit. Time I am, destroyer of the worlds. So when the material energy, the pradhan, which is the unmanifest form of the material elements when they're undifferentiated, when it's agitated by the destiny, the daiva of the conditioned souls, and when it's agitated by the time factor, by the glance of Krishna, and Krishna arranges for this energy to overwhelm the jiva souls. Mayadyakshenas prakriti suyate sa characharam. The material energy of the Lord is so powerful that no one can overcome it, except and unless by the grace of Krishna. If one surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one can become released from the influence of this potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, Daivihiyesha gunamayi maya dharatyaya. It's insurmountable. It's like a fortress in which the conditioned souls are kept. And it's all generated one from the other. First comes the sound, and then from the sound, Srila Prabhupada says, comes the element ether. And then comes air, and then water, and then, well, fire, then water, then earth. And it's interesting, these 5 elements are also there in Western cosmology back in the days of the Greeks and Romans. You know, they had these same 5 elements. But in the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find a complete explanation of how they're developed. And the important thing to understand about the Bhagavatam cosmology is that it's consciousness-based. It's not matter-based. Modern science believes that consciousness is not a symptom of the soul, but it's the byproduct of chemical interactions in the brain. In other words, they think that consciousness comes from matter. But in the Vedic cosmology, it's the opposite. Consciousness comes first, matter comes second. As Srila Prabhupada was explaining in this purport, all the material elements are generated from false ego, which is produced from the marginal potency of the Lord. So it's the exact opposite. From spirit, consciousness, nityo nityanam chaitanas chaitananam. Chaitana means conscious. So that's the nature of the living entity. It's eternal, it's conscious. Now, it's entirely natural to suppose that if I'm conscious, I'm personal, I'm individual, then my source should also be conscious, personal, and identical. So that is the factual nature of the whole cosmos as explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Everything is ultimately personal, conscious, and remains that way, individual. Some schools of thought, they admit there's consciousness, but they say it's impersonal. Others say there's no permanent existence of consciousness. Matter is the ultimate source of everything. But they're all wrong. The real understanding is that first, from aham sarvasya prabhavo mata sarvam pravartate, Krishna says, from me everything is coming. He's the supreme individual, personal, conscious living entity. And from him everything else emanates. So, in the absence of this knowledge, people are chasing after the phantasmagoria. So one of the purposes of the Krishna consciousness movement is to educate people about who they really are, because in the education systems today, most people are being taught we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. And there's nothing more than that. So if people have that conception of life, then automatically their goals and values become very materialistic. They think that to work hard and produce and consume more and more material things is the main purpose of human life. And they construct a whole system of financial institutions, economic institutions, political institutions, even religious institutions that are based on this idea that to gratify my senses until the end of life is the main purpose of human existence. Krishna explains this in the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Asatyam apratishtam te jagat ahur anishvaram. That there's a certain class of philosopher in this world that believes that matter is the only thing that exists. There's no purpose to the universe. There's no controller. Everything is up to us, just whatever we decide to do. And then further in the 16th chapter of the Gita, Krishna explains what the result of such a philosophy is for the people who propagate it and the people who accept it. He says, their lives will be full of anxiety from beginning to end because they're chasing after a phantasmagoria that's never going to satisfy them. And he also says they will create horrible things meant to destroy the world. And we see it all happening. Krishna said it 5,000 years ago, and we see it happening today. And then, but this was foreseen by the speakers of the Bhagavatam. You know, if we look carefully at the Srimad Bhagavatam, we see it begins with the sages in the Naimisharanya forest, gathering together. Why are they gathering together? Because they can see that the Kali Yuga is coming. It's just starting, and they're beginning to see the bad effects of it. So they are wondering, what can we do to help the people of the Kali Yuga? What can we take from our vast store of Vedic knowledge to give to the people of Kali Yuga? What are the essential truths that they need to know in order to survive this age and make the best use of their human form of life? And the Srimad Bhagavatam is basically their answer to that question, You know, Shaunaka Rishi, on behalf of all the sages at Naimisharanya, is putting these questions to Sutta Goswami. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is basically the answer to those questions. So one of the very important truths, out of all the truths there are in the vast Vedic literature, that the sages of Naimisharanya wanted us to know and understand is what we're hearing today. That what is the source? What is the origin of this world in which we find ourselves, this material universe? And we're learning that its origin is in false ego, the element ahankara, which is coming from ultimately, Srila Prabhupada says in this purport, it's being generated from the marginal potency of the Lord. Vishnu Shakti Para Prokta Kshetra Tata Para Avidya Karma Samganyam Tritya Shakta Ishyate. The Vishnu Purana explains that the Lord has three principal potencies. His spiritual potency that manifests the spiritual world, the kshetra potency, or the marginal potency, which is the jiva souls, and then there's the material energy, the tritiya shakti, avidya karma, the act which generates the activities of ignorance. So the marginal potency is situated between those two other potencies, the spiritual potency and the material potency. And we have a choice which potency we're going to identify with. Unfortunately, at the present moment, we've chosen to identify with the material potency. But Krishna has provided us, by his mercy, by his causeless mercy, the opportunity to identify ourselves with his spiritual potency. And by our presence here, we're demonstrating, yes, we're trying to take advantage of that opportunity in our human form of life. And that is what the Krishna consciousness movement is set up to do, to help us identify with the spiritual potency of the Lord and to influence others in any way that we can to also do that. Of course, we don't have to speculate about how to do it. We've been given instructions by Krishna's representative, Srila Prabhupada, how to do it, to have this center, Sri Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, as world headquarters of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, to chant the holy names of the Lord congregationally, as happens here every day, and especially during the Mayapur festival all over, to study and distribute transcendental literatures, to have the Temple of Vedic Planetarium, to communicate these messages to people all over the world. So somehow or other, by the causeless mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Pancha-tattva, we're gathered here today. So let us not misuse this opportunity to properly situate ourselves. And not just that, like Prahlad Maharaj said, yes, there are people who are just concerned about their own spiritual welfare. And we should be concerned about our own spiritual welfare. But beyond that, we want to care about the spiritual welfare of others, just like transcendental doctors delivering the medicine of the holy name to everyone. So, thank you for allowing me to serve you by trying to speak a few words about this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna. Any comments or questions? Rameshwar Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for that wonderful explanation of a very complex subject. So my question is about the ahankara. You're describing it as an element, and the individual jiva, that ahankara forms in its consciousness. Its pure consciousness turns away from Krishna, and at that time, this ahankara energy is created in the jiva's consciousness. I'm trying to understand that. Let's say jiva is leaving Krishna, falling from Krishna. Is the ahankara immediately then manifest as soon as he turns away?
Well, I'm going to stick with what I said in the class, that questions like that are durvitarkyena. They're very difficult. We'll never be able to figure out, Srila Prabhupada said, exactly why and how the conditioned soul entered this universe. You know, we can have different ideas about it, but the thing that anyone with any view on the question can accept is we're not in our natural position at the present moment, and that we need to qualify ourselves to attain our intended or natural position. I mean, I may have my personal beliefs about it based on my understanding of Srila Prabhupada's statements and the statements of Shastra. Others within our society and the wider Gaudiya Vaishnava society may have their understanding based on their understanding of the statements of their acharyas and scriptures that they study. But the thing that we should all be able to agree upon is that at the present moment we're not in the spiritual world, and we are meant to be there, and the reason we aren't there is because at some point, wherever it may have been, we've misused our free will, so that because of our misuse of free will, we're not with Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan or with Lord Chaitanya in another part of Goloka Vrindavan. So it's, like I said, I may have my understanding of it, but that's kind of the way I see it. And where and when we misuse that free will, some people may say we've eternally been misusing it, therefore we're nitya baddha, or some may say we misused it in Goloka Vrindavan, or some may say we misused it under Tatashta. But whatever it is, we misused our free will, and we're here now, and we're not in Goloka Vrindavan. So let's qualify ourselves by Haranama, 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 Kevalam, Kalal Nasteva, 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 Gatiranyata. Let's qualify ourselves to attain that level where we really belong. So that's the best answer that I can give to your question. If yes.
Thank you. So as I understand ahankara, for me, my experience is that's the bodily concept of life, whether it's the gross or subtle body. But ahankara is making me falsely identify myself with this gross or subtle body. So as we practice Krishna consciousness, we know that we can't leave this universe, material world, until the ahankara is completely dissolved.
Yes.
So we're making advancement, we're practicing. So there must be something that's still keeping that ahankara like tied to our consciousness. My understanding is there's so many seeds of material desires from eons ago in our heart that are always ready to fructify if we're not careful, and it's those desires that keeps us in this illusion of ahankara. Is that how we're going to dissolve it? We can't have one single gross or subtle desire in the bodily conception?
Yeah, I think Srila Prabhupada said to some disciples, I think a disciple asked him, "You mean if I have a desire for one rasgula?" He said, "Yes, you'll have to come back for it." So it's not an easy, in one sense it's easy, but in another sense it's not. I mean, like you said, there are statements in Srimad Bhagavatam that the process of devotional service will gradually dissolve that false ego, the whole subtle material apparatus that we're identifying with. But it's the saving grace, you could say, is that Krishna, as stated in this purport, Krishna has invested all of his transcendental energies in his holy name. And in the Bhagavatam he says also, Vidunoti Suhrit Satam. If Krishna sees that one is sincerely trying to become free from the influence of false ego, which is kind of like super glue. It's very, very subtle. It's the finest material element, but it's very strong and powerful. But Krishna within the heart, he also cleanses, Vidunoti Suhrit Satam. So by that combination of Krishna's immense potencies being invested in the holy name, that if one tries to chant without offense, then Krishna within the heart will also act to cleanse. And that's, I think, all I can aspire for, that Krishna somehow or other help me, and that I can be worthy of that help somehow or other. Anything else? Over there.
Thank you, Prabhu, for the nice lecture. Maybe in connection with that, I would like to ask, what can be the reason that I hear many times, I'm not the body, but it doesn't really get into my heart, it doesn't get into realizations really.
What can be the reason that, I didn't catch the last part.
What can be the reason that, hearing that I'm not the body isn't really realized, doesn't get into my heart, it's just on the mental platform, intellectual platform.
What can we do to realize I'm not this body?
Just so to say.
One way is to study carefully the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, where we can learn to use our intelligence to discriminate. You know, Krishna gives so many examples. We can observe how the body is changing over the years, It goes from childhood to adulthood to old age, but the consciousness of being an individual remains, even though the body is changing. That's something we can all observe. So that's something on the intellectual platform. We can take advantage of the instructions, the logical examples that are given in Shastra. But the other, and perhaps more potent method, is to follow the principles of Vaidhi Bhakti and observe, how by the conscious effort of the devotee, one can understand practically how one is not the body, get realized knowledge, not just jnana, but vijnana. And I think we've all had experiences where we understand that we're not the body, like where you get some practical realization that you're not the body. But even that is not enough. That is insufficient, because that's a negative understanding. There's nati, not this, not this, not this. That kind of understanding is partial realization. The real thing is to establish the positive. What am I? I'm an eternal servant of Krishna. Let me engage in devotional service. So what happens when one throws oneself into devotional service, despite bodily inconvenience and the resistance of the mind? Then if one does that, and just like myself, I can say, sometimes I feel some resistance to fully participating in the activities of devotional service, like congregational chanting of the holy name of the Lord. But when I actually allow myself or compel myself to engage, then I can experience something that is beyond anything that I'm able to get out of trying to enjoy in a material way. Like on the parikrama, there was big kirtan at the yoga peak. And it's like being in a transcendental jacuzzi. It's like a whirlpool. You get swept off your feet, in the ocean of devotion, and then you can understand, get a glimpse of what it is like to be beyond the confines of the material body, and get a little taste of what it's like to be a liberated spiritual soul. Like Rupa Goswami would say, I wish I had millions of tongues, to chant, the holy name and become absorbed in it. So just understanding I'm not this material body is just a beginning. We should understand positively I'm an eternal servant of Krishna, and the best way to realize that is to actually serve, not to just intellectually understand, I'm a servant of Krishna, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Let me engage in some service, like Arjuna said, Mamanusmara Yudhya Cha. Remember, Krishna instructed him, remember me and fight. So that was his service. His nature was Kshatriya, and Krishna wanted his service in that way. So engaged in some service, remember Guru and Krishna, and you'll practically experience what it means to be different than this body. Hare Krishna. Oh, yes.
Hare Krishna, Maharaj, Prabhu. You've been talking about desires. I understand desire is difficult, material desire is difficult. So my question is, when you have some pain in your body, you desire to get well. Is that a material desire? Because you get worries of your health. Yeah. So is that a material desire?
Yes.
To get well.
Depends upon why you want to get well. The body is like a vehicle for the soul. So, just like if you own a vehicle, an automobile, you have to keep it in good shape, or else you won't be able to use it. So if we understand my body is intended for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then our efforts to keep it in proper shape, to render the best service, are part of devotional service. That's also a spiritual desire. So many of us, as we're getting older, we have some problems with the vehicles that we occupy, and we try to keep them in the best shape possible so that we may continue to render service. But that's not a material desire. Yes.
Thank you. Thank
Go
you very
ahead,
much.
Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Well, my question is, in Chaitanya Charitamrita, we find that Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they were trying to push his brother towards Krishna Bhakti, although he was
Ram Bhakta.
inclined towards Lord Rama, and they tried a lot, and then at last they gave up. And then we also hear that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he came to give us Braj Bhakti, means Krishna's association. But we also hear that ultimately in our constitutional position, wherever we are serving the Lord in whatever form, that we will attain, even though we are engaged in Krishna Bhakti. So how to reconcile these two statements?
Rama is also Krishna.
What is that? Yeah, but I know I'm confused about these two things. Like when people say that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he wanted us to engage only and exclusively in Krishna Bhakti, meaning attaining Krishna's Golok Vrindavan, not Ayodhya or Vaikuntha where we are serving Lord Vishnu. And we also hear that if you are inclined to Lord Ram, in your Siddha, when you attain the Siddha Deha, meaning when you attain the full perfection of your Krishna consciousness, then wherever you are inclined to, you will automatically go there, not necessarily to Vaikuntha or Ayodhya.
Yeah. Ayodhya is still a very nice place, as described, at least as described in Brihad Bhagavatamrita. You know, when Gopakumar goes there, he likes it, but he's told to go further. So who knows? We may go to Ayodhya, but if in our heart, like Gopakumar in his heart, he was very dedicated to Krishna. So whenever he went to a place, they told him, go further, go further, go further. So if there, and usually, you know, Krishna within the heart, as Chaitya Guru, guides each soul to the Sangha, the Acharya, that will be best suited. So in Lord Chaitanya's movement, you're correct. He recommends the mood of the residents of Vrindavan, especially the gopis, to be emulated and desired as the ultimate goal. So I think Lord Chaitanya, that's Lord Chaitanya's movement. Somehow there may be a rare individual, you know, like Murari Gupta or
Anupam.
Who by their constitution is situated in a certain relationship with a certain form of Krishna. But mostly the souls that are attracted to this movement that Krishna arranges, Lord Chaitanya arranges to be part of this movement, are Krishna bhaktas. But if we find, you know, amongst us, are there any Ram bhaktas out here? Exclusive Ram bhaktas? We may make some allowance for that. Or like Lord Chaitanya, when he went to South India, he met one Brahmin who was very also into Ram, and you know, was preparing preparations as he would for Lord Ram. So if we find in our Sangha someone who is secretly worshiping Sita Ram and doesn't come to the temple and is just totally into, we don't reject such a person, we'll respect them. If it really is their swarupa, their original relationship, I don't think we would condemn such a person. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.